today you recently published a piece that was written entirely by AI or partly by AI.
And
Why don't you explain this piece that you wrote?
yeah, I mean, I didn't write it. It was literally AI doing it, and it came. So what did I do, and how did it happen? I posted something on LinkedIn, a blog post about Web3 and why digital transformation in the sports industry, or why Web3 plays an important role in digital transformation in the sports industry. And this came up because I was just showcasing AI capabilities to somebody who didn't play around a lot with AI. I mean, ChatGPT, Midjourney, and all these things have been popular. In this case, I showed Notion AI because I happen to be a Notion subscriber, and showed this also using similar models. And well, then I read it and I thought, oh, it's not so bad. I kicked out one paragraph that was not necessary. I asked it to write a little bit about our Unify solution at the end on top. And I think I changed the way it spelled Web3 because it capitalized it, and I'm of the belief it shouldn't be capitalized. So that's more or less the extent to which I edited it. I even asked it to write the headline for the piece. So I used the headline not as the main headline, but as the headline above the little paragraph where I say, "Hey, look, the next thing is written by AI." The header image created by Midjourney, obviously, and it worked out. It worked out quite well. I mean, it's not a great think piece that is like controversial or funnily written, but it's just a good showcasing because the arguments the AI used to explain the role of Web3, why it makes so much strategic sense for the sports industry. By the way, also applies to creators. To be a bit on topic here. Um, that is really good, and I think this little it's just a little showcase for how these AI based tools, I believe, will be used by creators in the upcoming year or two. The numbers will exponentially grow because it's so useful. It's not the replacement thing, but it's more the tool character of these.
Yeah. I think there's something missing from it, right? So I'm a writer. My background is in journalism specifically, and journalism and journalistic styles of writing is very much like objective writing. You'd almost think that AI would fit perfectly when it comes to like news and journalistic styles of writing. And I think that's a place where it does have like a practical utility, and it almost makes sense, right? And bringing it back to this idea of like relatability, I think users are going to start to slowly realize like, okay, most of the stuff on the web is essentially, even before AI, if somebody wanted to write a blog post about, I don't know, marketing best practices, you go to another blog post, you find the top 5 best practices. Maybe you go to another blog post, you get their top 5, you create your own little top 5 that combines 3 from one, 2 from the other. You give your own, maybe, like, I don't know, very crude thoughts on each one. So at the end of the day, like, most of the web content that exists is just like that happening 1,000 times. And like the most recently published article about the top 5 marketing best practices is like, is as if an AI recreated the same piece of content 1,000 times, right? So that original marketing genius who wrote that article is long gone by now. And I think with relatability, I think people and users are going to want more and more relatable content. And what I mean by that is like, um, honestly, video, audio, where they know that they're talking to a human who
But
has
do
real
you,
human
but do they
thoughts.
know?
Yeah, I mean, eventually, even those things are going to be. But I think video and audio are going.
Eventually is very close around the corner.
I think video is going to be the last bastion. It's the last. Like recently, I saw some photos circling around Twitter of like Donald Trump getting arrested, and I swear to God, you cannot tell that it's AI.
Yeah,
And I guess news outlets are picking it
I
up,
saw this
thinking that
too.
it actually happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you could quite get away with that kind of stuff with video. I mean, you've seen some deep fakes, I imagine. You could kind of tell. But yeah, you're right.
I mean, it's getting better by the minute. So let's see where we end up. It's interesting, but I mean, to your point of relatability, I mean, even if we go back to written content, so what I didn't do, and I didn't look enough into this aspect of AI capabilities. Probably I experiment with a few prompts who specifically task the AI to write something very emotional, something like this, because I could imagine that it can even write something to that extent, but like real human heart and soul. Of course, the AI doesn't have it. I don't know how good it is at imitating it. Let's probably try it around. But it's impressive what these tools can do. I also believe that in such a world, people are going to crave more and more connection with other people and with real stuff, and that is a trend. Like if you zoom a bit out, you see this since a long time. There's like the outdoor trend, the back to nature trend, and that is all related to like a counter movement to digitization and the stuff that is happening in our maybe work lives and also private social lives that happen in the digital realm. But it's not an either or. I think it's you will have both.
But I think you touched on a point of like, bear with me here. So back in like the Baroque era, the old medieval ages, the aristocrats tended to be people who hailed from the arts. So it's like composers, the Mozarts of the world. Like these were like the rock stars, the world's most known people. It was composers, actors. It was people who entertained. I guess is like the fundamental, the common denominator, right?
Sure.
And today, in this like digital revolution, this digital era, the rock stars of today are like tech entrepreneurs, like the Elon Musks of the world, the Jeff Bezoses. It's not necessarily entertainers.
Oh
You still have your
yeah, but you
actors.
yeah, but you still have so many entertainers that
Yes.
are super popular. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, of
yeah,
course.
and like the type of entrepreneur that becomes a rock star, the Elon Musk type. I mean, they are also highly controversial, and they've
Yeah.
looked at the entertainers' books to create their public personas quite knowingly.
Yeah. Yeah, but are like, take the number one actor, the best actor, the most popular actor. I think the highest earning actor is Kevin Hart or The Rock Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Yeah,
And are either of them billionaires? Single, just 1 billion.
yeah.
I don't think so. So like, yeah, they might be famous, people might know them, but the uh the money maybe doesn't match the fame
So,
with
but what's your
art.
point? Yeah, but
My
that has
point
always
is
been the
that
case. I mean, the artist has always been there was always the patron, the person in the aristocratic realm that was
but don't you
financing the fun.
yeah, perhaps. Yeah, maybe I'm looking at it wrong. But I guess what I'm trying to say, that's not even the important part. What I'm trying to say is like, as we enter further into like the digital age where things become more automated and these like high paying tech jobs maybe aren't as desired anymore by companies, maybe we shift back to like an era of arts and so much leisure time. We need people to entertain us while most of our jobs get automated.
That is that is potentially the
Yeah.
case. Let's
The
see.
street violinist will be
I
the aristocrat yet again.
I mean, history doesn't predict the future, but one thing that has been assumed since the early days of not even only digitization but also just automation was that we will have more spare time,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure that has happened. I mean, individual productivity has skyrocketed, but there are just so many more things, so many more jobs. But then, okay, there is this notion. I don't remember the author. I can Google it maybe, but bullshit jobs. That was a concept that a relatively famous book was written about at some point, and that is like there are now all these occupations like YouTuber and so on, but do they actually provide value? And then that is a very philosophical debate whether or not it provides value. I think many of these people who create stuff, particularly for YouTube, it's so educational. I would say it's clearly providing value, but yeah, that is something where jobs and the types of things people do in their free time are clearly shifting.
Yeah, I guess from a macroeconomic point of view, if you ask the question of what value are they providing to like the world or the economy as a whole, yeah, who knows? But when it comes to like entrepreneurship and generating money online, or just making money in general, are you providing value to one person? And is that one person willing to give you money? You know,
Yeah,
and maybe a macro economist might say
it
no.
was Graeber, David Graeber,
Okay.
by the way.
So yeah, I mean, value is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. Like
Yeah,
from like a
definitely.
yeah, from a macro point of view, perhaps not. Maybe you know, a fitness vlogger isn't really helping the economy, but
Well, maybe
maybe
because
even that. Yeah, maybe that.
people stay healthy, so on. That's a long debate,
Yeah,
but that is the state of it. Should we get into
yeah,
our questions? Hey,
we
by the
should.
way, before we get into the questions, probably people are missing Jonas. We didn't even address it. He had something urgently coming up, so he couldn't join us today, but he will be back on the next episode. That's for sure. For those
Yeah,
of you
and while
wondering.
we're on the topic, before we get into these questions on this episode, if you guys are interested in getting your questions answered, head over to unify.io/podcast. You'll be able to find that in the show notes. You can submit your questions. Me and Thomas and Jonas, we gather, we research them so that we can provide you with actionable tips and advice on how you can approach the challenges that you might be facing. So head over to the website, submit your questions. We love to see them. We love to research them and break them down for you. So let's go ahead and get into this week's questions. And we'll start with question one. This one comes from Todd Burbo. So, Todd, if you are listening, hope you are. If not, I'll try to find you and link this to you. And your question is, I have a fledgling podcast, around 50 listeners, and have an opportunity to land a very high profile guest with potential to explode our following. What sort of infrastructure should we have ready in place to capitalize on unprecedented visibility? So he's a podcast creator. He's got a podcast. I'll put the links to the podcast in the show notes, and you guys can go check it out yourself. Give him a like and a follow if you do. And yeah.
Just to
So
name drop, maybe let's name drop it. It's called Soccer
yes,
Situations, and it's a soccer
soccersituations.com.
podcast.
Yep. So Todd's got a pretty interesting problem, and I think it's a first world problem. It's a good problem to have. You have a fairly fledgling podcast, as you mentioned, and you're going to have a guest that you're hoping will help you pop off and go viral. I think that's a good problem to have, but you're right. Um, it's difficult, and it could be a wasted opportunity if you don't approach it almost mathematically. You almost have to approach this in a pretty measured way. And I think a good place to start. There's an additional comment here. We're 15 episodes in, have a website, a web store, and social setup, but no video due to budget. Okay, so Todd, I want to first address something where it's the technicals behind it. So you mentioned that there's no video. I would urge you to try to get some type of crude setup set up. um, Try to get video, man, because you might regret it later on if you don't have video. It's one of those things. It's like think of like every action movie you've seen, right? Where the tough dude walks into the room with an assault rifle, and then the scientist looks at him and says, "Hey, why are you bringing an assault rifle on this mission?" It's like, and then he always says something like, "I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Have the video so that if you ever need it in the future, you'll have it. Just try. I mean, it could be as simple as just having webcams. You know, if you're doing a physical podcast recording at somebody's house or in a garage or an office, try to set up your smartphone. I mean, these days, you know, smartphones outproduce webcams or even some DSLRs. So try to get video set up. Try to make sure that the environment in the background looks good. Try to do as much like pre-production as you can to try to make a digestible type of video for people. Um, and then, you know, besides from the technicals, you know, make sure your audio is working and in order. Make sure you have an extra mic just in case. Really try to pull out all the stops for this one, because this could be an episode that not only will help you propel you into a bigger audience, but it can also be reused in the future, right? So like, it comes down to this idea of create once but use 100 times or 1,000 times.
Yeah, and I
So
think just to double down on this aspect, I mean, if it's a fairly famous person, that is what I assume from your question, Todd, then I think having this person on video next to you as not only as proof as if you needed this, but it will certainly help to get you some traction. So if you can do it, and like Ron says, there is like I'm using a Logitech webcam that is doing 1080p nowadays. You can even find webcams that can do 4K. That looks reasonably good, or good enough for most purposes, especially if you want to do something like our format here, right? You have just
yeah,
webcams and this, and then podcasts. Yeah, many people will just listen to it anyways, but having the video version, I think, does something. So just get it started and don't put too high expectations in terms of production value on
yeah.
it. But sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead, Ron.
No, no, no. That definitely a good point. It doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to look like a studio. It just has to be something. Um, And another thing is audience conversion. So like the next part of the equation of, once you know that everything's set up, you have the video, you have the audio, everything's good, audience conversion is going to be pretty important, right? So this means podcast subs. So wherever your podcast might be hosted, make sure you have clear calls to action throughout the podcast. I recommend one at the beginning, one in the middle somewhere, and then one at the end. Call to action, compel people, or not compel, but ask them nicely to give you a rating, give you a subscribe, to follow the podcast, whatever that mechanism is on that native platform, utilize it. Um, but taking it a step further, try to have some type of owned way to capture users. So it could be a newsletter, it could be just a link tree with a link to your newsletter or to your website. Maybe you have a WordPress site already set up. Maybe you want to look into Unify, which is the platform that we've created at Liquidity, where you can manage your community, manage your content all there. It's got a lot of cool Web3 features. Check it out. We won't get too deep into that right now, but try to set up some way to establish I always like to refer to it as a honeycomb, where it's a way to capture people who stumble upon your content. You just want to have something like that set up in general. So making sure it's set up for this crucial episode is very much recommended by us.
Yeah,
And then
and
yeah, go ahead.
in general, looking on like the soccer situations website where you have it, like it's sometimes very small things that can be improved. And I mean, if you go on the podcast side, then of course there are like some icons for Apple, Spotify, and SoundCloud, but they are super small. I almost, when looking at the site, I didn't find them. And on the episode detail page, which is where most people will land, it's even smaller. There's a big title, and I really had to look 2 or 3 times to find a way, how can I subscribe to this. I almost figured it wasn't there, so I would make these much more prominent, and in the description of the episode tell people where to subscribe. That's definitely the case. And on your main homepage, I would also make big call to actions for subscribing.
Yeah, Todd, a recommendation there, if you want to find a more like itemized list of what Thomas said, um, find a blog post or something on the internet. Try to find somebody who's a little bit credentialed, and look for stuff like on page optimization, podcast landing page optimization, conversion optimization. Those types of posts can really help you to better structure your landing page so that you can capture these people, like Thomas said, having bigger calls to action, top of fold, where as soon as a user lands on your page, you want to make sure your most valuable user actions appear right at the beginning. Stuff like that. Look it up. I can perhaps post one in the show notes for you. Some type of resource that I trust that I've used in the past. And yeah, moving on. The second part, or the third part, probably one of the most important parts, is the narrative approach that you want to take to this podcast. Now, I think it's important when you have a guest, especially a high authority or a very valuable guest, you want to make sure that the stuff you guys talk about has some type of interesting angle that hasn't been covered in some other piece of content that they've done. Now, a lot of people like to continue talking about the same types of topics because they're masters of those topics. So I'm not saying you want to like catch him off guard and ask him stuff that he knows nothing about, but try to find like what's the scoop, right? So as I mentioned, I come from a journalistic background. Like, what's the scoop here? What's the story here with this guest? So it could be, hey, what's your origin story? How did you become, popular? How did you become successful within football? I imagine. Um, but that potentially that might be boring. Like it could be a good place to start, but try to transition the conversation somewhere where this person you're interviewing, like what's their, again, we've mentioned this so many times in our podcast, what's their unfair advantage? What's some type of experience that they hold that would be interesting and isn't something that you can find somewhere else, and try to dig into that element if you can. Um,
And
and yeah, go ahead.
no, no, because that point is so essential.
Yep.
You want to do this, but I'm a firm believer that the worst way to approach it, if you're like going in there and you try to fish for a scoop, and especially in podcast formats, this is not going to work. Maybe a print journalist can ask questions because you will never get the tone, and even if the other person is annoyed, but for a podcast to work, at least that's my opinion, you need to do something that is conversational and that feels like like a real dialogue. So I don't know how many interviews you did with like famous people. I assume the person has some level of famous, you put it. So don't approach it with a mindset of, oh, there's this famous person, and don't approach it with like a list of questions that you want to go through, and that feels like pretty much a boring interview like they've done many times. Just approach it with a mindset of, hey, here's a conversation, and I listen to some of your episodes, and I think you are quite knowledgeable about what you are talking to. So approach it with this mindset, that you do a conversation, that you probably not only ask questions but put your ideas in, confront the person with ideas, and that is how you will get them feel comfortable, be in a conversation, and that is where you can get the unique and the authentic stuff from this person, which can then maybe make for a good little headline or tweet or quote that you use to promote the your episode.
Yeah, and I think some really strong strategies in getting them to kind of lower their guard or to be more conversational. Maybe you've heard of the show Hot Ones. It's a show where um, the host will eat hot wings with a celebrity or with a famous person, and they get increasingly hot every wing. And he's noticed that as they eat each wing, and it gets increasingly hot, and they're more disturbed and more bothered by the heat, they start to open up more and talk more. So there's different strategy you can use. You can also use humor, right? So start by simply talking about a story that's funny. You want to establish rapport early on so that the conversation does feel flowy and feel conversational. So thank you, Thomas. Thomas, as you're talking, I noticed, like, man, voice starts to get dry. The breaks do help. Gives me an opportunity to have a little sip of coffee and listen to you. So thank you for interrupting me.
Definitely. So,
Yeah.
and one more thing, like if you plan to do more stuff with guests, and this might be a good way, by the way, to leverage also your first famous guest, because that is like a little business card that shows, hey, look, I can have stuff, I can have famous, I do have famous people on my podcast. So the next person, to convince the next person, will get increasingly easier. And what you might also want to do is look at a few interviewers who are really good at their craft, because it is a craft, it's an art form. Somebody I studied a while ago is Howard Stern. I mean, I guess when you if you're US based,
He's the goat.
everybody knows him. He's the
He's the
goat.
goat.
And you don't even have to look at only the stuff that creates a lot of scandal, where he's talking about going to prostitutes or so, but even the stuff that is more about topics. He's so good at sharing personal stuff to get the conversation going, and he's really good in sports podcasts. I guess everybody knows Bill Simmons, but he's also a very crafty interviewer. Like if you listen to the 4 or 5 episodes he did with KD, Kevin Durant, um, it's very well done, how he sets the mood, how he gets this going. And if you listen to the stuff with an analytical eye, then I think you can learn a lot from what these people do. I was
Yeah.
crazy about interviewing when I first started to get into podcasts, and I really dig deep into interviewers, because it's really impressive what the best of the best do
Yeah.
and how they do it.
And I think, like most other skills, it is a muscle that you do need to train and work out and practice. And if you can get a couple more episodes under your belt where you implement some of these strategies of like rapport establishing, common ground finding, and those types of things early on in episodes. I think the more you could do, the better you'll be once that valuable episode comes. So packaging everything together. So obviously establishing like a strong narrative where the content of the actual podcast itself is interesting and people want to watch it. Maybe even slightly controversial. Maybe you can swing a few ideas his way where I don't know, maybe some controversial topics that not many people like to talk about. He might be interested in doing so. So bringing it around now, the last part is obviously the post promotion. Once it's created, once it's published, I mentioned it already. You want to create something once and make it really good, and then you can then use it 1,000 times after that. So keep that in mind. When you're promoting this podcast after you publish it, keep in mind that you can reactivate this podcast, once a month or once every other month. You can, maybe clip it into a smaller clip, share it on Twitter, share it on Instagram. Typically, that tends to work really well when you take something that's long form, you clip it up, and you publish it natively onto these different platforms where users can view the video directly on the platform that they're using. That's tends to be the best way to get people to actually go and watch that long form piece. It's something that we actually need to do a lot more of ourselves. So we're going to practice what we preach as well. So I think, Todd, that's a good place to start. Try to implement these things that we just talked about. And I think you should be good. I think,
There is one
yeah,
aspect in the post production, post promotion phase that I think should also go mentioned. Of course, you want to make sure that your guest is also distributing the
right,
episode, and you want to make sure that it looks really good in their respective feed, be it their Instagram, their Twitter, and so on. So make it super easy by providing a sharing snippet, right? If it's audio, maybe have a little snippet that people can click, have a good preview image in place for if it's the link that you want them to share,
yeah,
and so that it stands out and their followers look at it. And what I
yeah,
would also like to mention, so there is so much content with so many famous people, so even if you have the first guest and it can break your show and it will certainly increase your audience, you need to keep on keeping on and stay at it, because you are going to get a spike in listeners, but you need to be consistent afterwards, and don't expect like from then on you will be famous, because very often it's not this way. It doesn't work this way. Very often it will spike and a few people will come back regularly, but also say usually you have you mentioned around 50 subscribers, so say you have 50 listeners per episode and this episode gets 1000. Don't expect your next episodes to have 1000 listeners as well. Expect that maybe you will have 75, which is already a great growth, but these are maybe the realistic expectations. So don't expect too much, but as I mentioned before, use this high caliber guest to get more high caliber guests, and then grow from there step by step. But it will take time nonetheless.
yeah,
Unless you get super lucky. Sometimes you can get lucky.
yeah, yeah. Virality is kind of unstudyable. We can't really look at what content goes viral and how to like reverse engineer it. So it really comes down to, is it the right narrative at the right time, and maybe a little bit of luck where the algorithm then picks it up. And I think on that note,
And,
like Thomas said, just hold on real quick, Thomas. Evergreen content. Make sure that the narratives that you do use in this episode, try to keep it as evergreen as possible so that it can continue to perform over time.
yeah, that's I guess
Yeah,
a very good point.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, on your virality comment, look at how many people did get viral, and that like one viral video smash it. But it's super hard for many of these creators to use the virality to build something that is lasting.
yeah,
And you might be able to look at this maybe for another episode, to dive even deeper into this notion, like how can you make it as lasting as possible. but yeah, it's hard to plan for it, if not impossible.
Try to make the episode before and the episode directly after it bangers, because the likelihood that people will come to your podcast and want to scope the situation and check around, they're most likely going to either hit next or hit previous video. So just try to make sure that the two videos around that crucial video, try to make them bangers if you can. So if you already recorded some that you think will perform really well, try to slot them in there in between those. So Todd, hope that helps. Thomas, any final words for Mr. Burbo?
Now let's get to Julia.
All right, Julia. Question 2. Thank you for submitting your question, Julia. And here it is. The world is big, and globalization makes all of us creators compete. That's right. How can I, as one of millions of creators, compete in this? And how much cooperation with other creators is beneficial? And at what point should I rather focus on my own podcast? I post a lot of content on Instagram and TikTok, which are also watched a lot. How can I develop leads that will lead to how can I develop leads that will lead to paid coaching in the future?
Julia
And
snuck in a bunch of questions here.
yeah, Julia, it's ask a creator economist one question. Just kidding. And Julia is a life and business coach, and she focuses on mental health, spirituality, and company and business models. So she's kind of
Interesting
like a
combination, isn't it?
yeah, it's kind of like a success coach, I suppose. Success in your mental health, success in spirituality, business, company. Julia, thanks for your question again. Thomas, do you want to start this one?
Well, yeah, I can certainly begin because I do have some thoughts on it. I also have friends who do similar things. So let's maybe take it question by question. The first part about competing as a creator. I mean, that's a gigantic question and it's super general. So I will keep it very brief because I think it's hard to address it. But I think you can go hyper niche or you can make it super mainstream. So if you are like in life coaching and business. I mean, the way you put it, I would almost say, well, that is way too general because you have in like just these things. Maybe in fact there is a lot more specialization in what you do, but it's so broad. So many people are coaches, life coaches, spiritual leaders, and so on. But very few of them are really successful. Very few of them are really good. And I think in this field, if you break it down, there are many niches, right? You can do something for only for managers in a specific industry or in a specific function if you want to focus it on business. Or if you want to be more on the spirituality side, then have really like a discipline in there. Maybe there you are a systemic coach who is also well versed in shaman traditions, and you do something for people who are interested in the overlap of this. Because and that is, if you are a creator online, you can suddenly do it because you're global, or not global, but the total addressable market of people you can potentially reach is so big that even in this very specific niche, you will be able to build an audience that is much bigger than if you would just have local marketing and you would have to rely on finding people for this within your city or your village. So that is my answer to the first part of the question. I don't know, maybe you have something to add here on this one.
No, I mean, as you mentioned, it is like a very high level problem. Um, I think, honestly, I've said this so many times, but with millions of creators and increased competition, people are wanting to build businesses online more and more every day. So the best advice that I can give is just start creating and create consistently, and you will eventually find your small corner, right? You'll eventually find the thing that works, that resonates. Just be consistent, show up, because simply showing up already puts you in the top 20% of online creators, simply just showing up every day. So that's all I would add. Just consistency. Thomas, you're muted.
Huh, sorry, that doesn't happen every day. So on the second aspect, I mean, I said go niche, but the other way is to take it super mainstream. But I think that is potentially kind of hard to do, to take it this mainstream. In in this field. But if you can be the most entertaining life coach and package this in a way that is so standing out, and I do not have an idea for this, it's not probably my area of or genre of expertise. But then maybe yeah, you can also do something quite general because it's appealing to so many people who never cared about coaching before. That would be the other way to take it. But then certainly one where you need a lot more luck and go things your way than the
Thomas,
other approach.
I do have a small comment on that point, though.
Sure.
Um, I also don't have like a super specific type of thing you could do, but I know that one thing in coaching, especially like life coaching, mentalism, hypnosis, the most yeah, the most challenging hurdle to overcome when it comes to selling is overcoming skepticism. So try to create content that has to do with how you can help people overcome the skepticism of working with you. So what is that for most people? It's testimonials, it's success stories. Focus on creating some of that kind of stuff, or at least have it somewhere available so that when people do stumble upon your content, when they stumble upon your top funnel content, they'll be able to find these testimonials and they'll be like, okay, like it's somewhat legit. Like she's had success with other people. That skepticism that people tend to have with these types of industries might be slightly reduced. So success stories. Sorry, Thomas.
So second part of the question is about cooperation and when to start, when how many co-ops with other creators you should do, and when should you focus on your own creation, your own podcast. So I think the way to think about these cooperations with other creators, and I think they certainly make a lot of sense in most cases. They are a tool to create conversions to get your name out. And if you have a very small audience yourself, then collaborations can be a very good tool, I believe, because it helps you to build your own your own network, and you become a bit more of a known factor within your community. I mean, in the end, that's also community, right? Like the coaching spiritual communities, these are online communities, and people move in these online communities. And if your name is at this place and that place that people already frequent, then you earn credibility, you earn trust. So it certainly makes sense. And of course, make it also easy for people to follow you on channels where it is easy. So because you mentioned podcast, well, maybe building a podcast yourself, if you have access to being a guest on so many other podcasts, or regularly on one or two other podcasts that have a sizable audience, then maybe start with this. Build trust with an audience that is also interested in your stuff, and rather send people to your Instagram, I guess, is an important channel in that context. Maybe your YouTube, whatever you are doing, where people can easily subscribe. And then once you have a certain audience, or if already you have a podcast with your own audience, then double down on this, and then really use the audience that you have for your own podcast, because that is where you can benefit from the most, whether it's customer acquisition for your coaching, which you also ask in your question, or even something that you can earn from via selling advertising, for instance, or other ways to monetize it.
Yeah, I think collaborations are not only like a growth tool, they're also like, so in a lot of industries, people when they create businesses, they create moats where it's essentially like protection against competition. And you have to think of it like, if you want to enter some industries and you want to establish yourself as like a credible person in that industry, like what's easier, storming the castle and trying to get over that moat that's been created, or sending a raven to the king in the castle and saying, hey, can I have dinner with you, can we work together? Like that's sometimes the way in, right? It's the way to establish yourself as credible. It's the way to get past those moats that other creators or other successful people in those industries might have created. So think of it that way, that collaborations are like a fantastic growth tool and sometimes very necessary if you want to break into some industries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the last part of the question is where Julia says, I post a lot of content on Instagram and TikTok, and the content is also watched a lot. How can I develop leads that will lead to paid coaching in the future? And I think that is probably the most difficult problem, or maybe not. But I guess the first thing is, if your content is good and people are interested in it, that is a very good first step to convert people to do more. To do more, to take coaching, pay you for coaching, make them also understand what the benefit of personal coaching is versus your content. I think you share certainly a lot. You didn't sadly mention links to your platform, Julia, which probably next time you do, then we can get the name out. Unless you don't want it, maybe you don't. But so that is certainly uh, one one part of it. Say, hey, look, with this personal contact, I'm able to help you much more, drilled down to your specific situations, work with you on your specific problems. It's so much more valuable than just what I share online, and so on. And also mention this in your content. Don't shy away from advertising the added value of your coaching, but also expect very low conversion numbers, right? If you get 1 in 1,000 people to sign up for coaching, that's already excellent. And maybe you have to expect less, especially in the beginning. So, what you definitely need to do from a pricing perspective is price correctly for these low conversion numbers. So if you only get like less than percentages of your content watchers, people who engage with your content, to sign up, obviously coaching needs to be pricey, especially if it is the only thing you sell, because your content is for free, as I would assume. So it needs to be highly priced. And that is something that needs to be there. But of course, you also have the option, if you have many people who follow your content who are interested in you, think about extending your product portfolio, so to speak, and consider creating more scalable formats. For instance, like a community help desk or virtual group formats, where you can have much lower price points and also maybe higher conversion numbers. So something, for instance, we do on with our Unify solution is we make it very easy for you to have your community ask you questions. And for instance, you can sell a little access pass that you can easily create, and only people who have one of the 10 passes, so that is like your digital group, they can ask you stuff in an AMA. Maybe you are available for a video chat once per month, and there is probably even some exclusive personalized content for this group of people. And these are things that probably don't i- i- urge somebody or require that somebody is willing to pay three-figure amounts per hour for coaching, and in some cases even more than that, but where you can target another segment within your audience.
Yeah, you probably need to diversify your revenue. Where, as Thomas mentioned, digital products just are the most scalable, and try to productize access to yourself. Just to kind of package what Thomas said, like think about your time and your access like a product. How can I sell this as like a scalable product to people? And then yeah, you can just essentially create like subscription tiers, or like Thomas said, access passes, where based on how much you charge, that's how much access they'll then get to you. I think that's a safe way to grow, where you're not relying solely on one revenue stream, which is your coaching.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
Okay, question two, Julia. Hope that helps. Reach out to us if you have another question. Go ahead and submit it through the site, and we'll be happy to answer it if you want to. If you want us to elaborate on any parts of that, and we'll head over to question three now, and it is from Mark S. Mark S. Do you have a last name? I hope it's Sanchez, and I hope you're the former quarterback of the USC Trojans, but likely not. I have a YouTube channel, 23K subs, and I make movie reviews and social commentary videos that are kind of controversial, and I routinely get videos demonetized. Okay. My subs are active and engage a lot with my videos. It seems my videos are not reaching them a lot of the time. I want to continue creating the types of videos I'm creating, but it seems harder and harder. Should I change my content but risk losing my audience? Okay, this is a tough
Come on,
one.
take it away. I think
Yeah,
that's
so
your home turf, ain't it?
to sum it up, he's got a fairly small but very engaged YouTube channel. He creates fairly controversial content, but tends to work really well with his existing audience. Mark didn't tell us how long he's been doing it to get 23K subs. Um, so, but I'll just break it down. There's basically two paths that you could take, in my opinion. I mean, there's obviously infinite paths you could take, but these are two that I see as realistic. So the first one is that you switch your current structure to doing free content that's not controversial, and then you gate your controversial content. This is a pretty safe and industry standard way that a lot of creators tend to do this, where because of the way that YouTube and Twitter and all these different platforms operate, basically you're not going to be able to really do like super controversial content. You're not going to be able to break terms of service and remain monetized. That's just where things are headed. That's a story for another podcast, perhaps, but that's the way it is. So you need to essentially adjust to that if you want to continue doing what you're doing. And it gives you the opportunity to still service those fans that you currently have, those 23K subs who do want the controversial stuff. You can still serve them with gated content. And it presents the opportunity for you to then start charging for that content.
So
So it's
when
a
you say gated content, what do you
yeah.
mean?
Okay, so gated content. Think Patreon. Think a premium subscription. Think Unify, where basically you have a honeycomb. You have a place where users can go and they can pay you for additional content or for something that's gated. It's behind a gate. They have to unlock the gate with on Unify. It can be something like tokens, NFTs, a subscription tier, or it can be something like just a simple fiat transaction, just money for content, right? So there's tons of services who offer that. Um, so that's one way, and I think that's a good way to do it, and a good way to start, especially if you're maybe a digital novice and you're not super adept. You don't have a big team around you. That's like a really easy way to kind of familiarize your audience with this concept of paying for the content that you provide them. And you could phrase it like, hey, donate to keep the dream going. If you guys still want the stuff that I'm creating, like buy me a coffee, like donate, get this $1 per month for this tier, and you get all of my controversial stuff that you guys used to like. So you can keep it
Just
short, just to
but
yeah,
but a question on this one, because I would assume that when you say don't do the controversial stuff there, that then, like, if I envision a line on which you can walk and everything on this side is too controversial, demonetized, maybe even taken off the platform, everything here is just super mainstream compatible, then you want to be maybe not right on the line, but you still want to be fairly close to the line, because if your shtick and what you essentially want to sell is controversial, it needs to be clear that you are this kind of creator. You don't want to be all
yeah,
over here and have like super clean stuff, right?
yeah. You don't want to suddenly overnight become like a children's YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
You want to still, like Tom said, you still want to kind of. There's actually two creators that you should check out, I think, and maybe you can go back to when they first started doing this and see how they presented it to their audience. But their name was the Hodge twins. They started as they're two twins. They were doing fitness stuff on YouTube. They then became essentially political pundits, and they lost a huge chunk of their audience because of it. They came out as conservatives, so they were two conservative dudes. Now they have a YouTube channel called Conservative Twins, and on there they talk about political stuff, and they have obviously a paid version where they go, maybe they're a little bit more divisive, a little bit more controversial, and the way they did it was super interesting. Just check them out. You'll see that the way they handled it was pretty well done. They had millions of subscribers, so I think that's a good case study that you can look into. But yeah, that's one way that you can go. The second way is that you keep doing what you're doing and you bite the bullet on any revenue you might generate from YouTube. That sounds difficult, and I think it is difficult, especially in the short term. But essentially, what you're going to do is you're going to continue doing what you're doing. and you're not going to monetize, you're not going to generate any type of revenue from YouTube and YouTube AdSense and the sponsoring that comes from YouTube and like the safe for work type stuff, say goodbye to that. Continue doing what you're doing, create the controversial stuff. And I think the best way now to monetize is you then create a community. You create something, again, you can use Unify to do this, a place where these fans can go, and you make it very clear to them, hey, like YouTube has demonetized all my shit, but head over to my Unify platform and support. Keep the dream alive. Keep letting me do what I'm doing. I'm going to keep publishing my stuff here on YouTube. I'm going to publish some more stuff on my platform. You could do even more controversial stuff on your platform if you wanted to, but essentially that's one way you can use it. Just see YouTube like a way to reach users. Now, I don't know if I
And
would
also,
yeah.
A- and also, like on YouTube, you can still get a fairly big audience. Will
Yeah.
always be bigger than on your own thing and in your own community.
Yeah.
So a second way to monetize this, and I would combine both approaches, is if you are demonetized on YouTube, so there is no ads run against your content. But some brands might be, and some companies might be happy to still be in your context. I mean, if you do controversial movie reviews, maybe there are movie companies that also want to be a bit more controversial, and brands in the entertainment sector who might like it. I mean, I don't know the stuff you're doing, but if it is fairly acceptable for edgy brands, then you can definitely find your own advertisers, and this can be much more
Yeah.
profitable even than the shares that come in your way from YouTube. And if you then combine it with this premium community that Ron mentioned, I think it can also be a very valid approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point, Thomas. I totally forgot about the fact that you could still do advertising. You could still advertise with companies just in a direct approach, right? Direct to advertiser type relationship. So that still exists. You don't have to rely on only YouTube AdSense. That's just YouTube's native advertising method for creators.
And there it makes a lot of sense to have, of course, like a support structure, so you don't have to cut all these advertising deals yourself. But there are
Yeah.
good managers, good agents, probably you already have one at 23K. Not necessarily the case, but can be the case. And they have relationships with advertisers, they know all the business talk to get it done, and that is how you can do it more directly if you wanted to.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so basically, those are the two paths. I think Thomas makes a good point. I think combining the two is probably the way that I would go. Um, Maybe try to tone it down a little bit on YouTube and just avoid those trigger words, right? So, like, if you could remain monetized on YouTube, but you avoid like the trigger topics or the trigger words, just play ball. I guess play ball is the thing. Learn the algorithms and learn the sentiment on these platforms and just toe that line like Thomas mentioned. That'd be my recommendation for you. Make sure you have, like I said, some type of honeycomb where you can capture users, even if it's as simple as just, hey, keep supporting what I'm doing. I think that's a good
Yeah.
place to start. And yeah, things to consider for your free content. As I mentioned, avoid breaking TOS and pivot and be less sensational. That's kind of the final takeaway.
Yeah.
But other than that, Thomas, anything else?
No, just to double down on your last point, in my notes I wrote, get familiar with the platform policies and be smart about it, because
Right.
that is, if you're dumb about it, if you're just ignorant and you say fuck you all, then the platforms will fuck you back, to use very candid language. Maybe we
Yeah.
get demonetized now here. But that is certainly a problematic stance. So what you should much rather do is understand what goes, and try to walk the line.
Yeah. Yep. Thomas, thank you. Now I have to actually do some video editing on this and beep out that.
Beep
That's
beep.
that's more editing that I like to do already. But yep. Thomas, thanks for joining me. Do you have any closing thoughts? If not,
Oh, yes, I do have a very important thought, and that is, if you like what we are doing here, then leave us a rating, 5 stars preferably, and a review. That helps a lot. If you watch this on YouTube, like it, comment it. That is also super, super helpful, just to get the word out of what we are doing here. And then, of course, if you have a question, shoot it over. We are so happy to answer your questions, to share what we think. We are also going to bring on in the future some guests who answer these questions in different specializations. So keep the questions coming. We are just getting started here, and we hope we can really contribute and bring something to the creator economy, as you nowadays call it.
Yep. Thanks, Thomas. I was asking if you had any closing thoughts because I was then going to say if not, and then say all that you just said. But thank you for taking it.
Yeah,
My, my my mouth is quite dry, so you saved me.
great.
All
So
right,
have a
guys.
good time, everybody.
Yeah. See you next week.